Hello everyone, I'm Tom and welcome to my studio again for this is the third in my series of art videos. And this time we're going to be talking about an illustration rather than a painting, and we're not going to be looking at it on this wall, we're going to look at it on this computer monitor over here. But first, what's the difference between an illustration and a painting or a drawing? Well, for my purposes, an illustration just depicts a thing or an event. So it could be a painting, could be a drawing, I suppose it could even be a piece of sculpture. But today, the illustration we're going to discuss is a digital one. This one right here, specifically illustrating an encounter between Ares, the Greek god of war, and Diomedes, one of the young Greek chieftains at Troy. The topics we're going to discuss will include media and techniques, narrative storyline, and imagery. So let's start with media and techniques. One of the things that I particularly enjoy about doing this kind of thing is that it involves ancient and new, modern media. The ancient is good old-fashioned drawing, with a pencil and a pen, and the new is the digitization part. So here's how it goes. When I have an idea for an illustration, I start out with a drawing or maybe a series of drawings. It might be a complete composition, all the major and minor figures in place, or it might be separate drawings of separate figures that I later combine and arrange into a final composition. But when I have the drawings done, when I've done the pencil work and then any ink work that I need to do, I scan them into this HP scanner over here and create a JPEG file out of them. And when I have the JPEG files, I then import them into a computer application called CorelDRAW. And CorelDRAW lets me manipulate those drawings. I can emphasize a line, I can simplify a curve, I can remove details, things like that that I think are necessary before I finalize the composition. So once I've got the drawings finalized with any tweaks that I do in CorelDRAW, I then import them into another computer application, Photoshop. In Photoshop, there's a lot that happens. The first thing is that if I'm using multiple drawings, Photoshop will allow me to cut and paste, as it were, these pieces into a final composition. So I could take a figure of Athena in her chariot and combine it with a figure of Diomedes and position and size all of the main characters and elements the way I want them to be. Then I go into the phase of laying in the colors, the highlights and shadows, basically any kind of pictorial element that maybe I didn't do in the drawing. Might be putting in cloth textures or flesh tones, things of that nature. It's almost like making a collage, only it's a lot more complicated than that. In fact, it involves creating layers of these images and manipulating them separately. And there can be a lot of them, like typically it'll be hundreds. And in fact, in this particular one, there's well over 1,000 layers before I'm done with it. But once I get all that done, once I get all the remaining pieces of the image done, the colors right, the shadows right, the textures right, then I have to often go back to CorelDRAW. It's an iterative process. I go through the drawing phase, I go through the CorelDRAW phase, do some photoshopping, and when all the photoshopping bit is done, I usually have to take it back into CorelDRAW, make some final tweaks there, and then one more time into Photoshop where I put on the final touches. And then that's it. Simple as that. Voila. Okay, so that's the technical story behind this illustration. Now let me tell you about the story behind it. As I said, it's a scene from the Iliad. We all know the story of the Trojan War, where Helen and Paris run off from Sparta, and they flee back to Troy, also called Ilium, where Paris lives. And all the Greeks assemble an army and they sail to Troy to get Helen back. And they spend 10 years there. And the Iliad picks up in that final year, and it starts with an argument between Achilles and Agamemnon, and then talks a lot about the battles. So this illustration deals with one of the battles. Book 5 of the Iliad depicts largely what's called the Aristeia of Diomedes. Aristeia, by the way, could be loosely translated as heroic battle deeds, kind of like a highlight film for a modern-day athlete. And Diomedes was the youngest of the Greek chieftains at Troy. But nonetheless, he was highly respected as a strategist and a warrior, because although he was the youngest, he was, with the exception of Achilles, the most feared and the most lethal of all the Greek warriors. In fact, he was such a powerful warrior that in all of Greek mythology there are really only 2 instances of a mortal doing direct combat with one of the Olympian gods. One was Hercules, and the other was Diomedes in Book 5 of the Iliad. And in Book 5, Diomedes encounters 3 of the Greek gods, Apollo, Aphrodite, and Ares. And after attacking Apollo 3 times, Diomedes backs off, which was a wise decision. But with both Aphrodite and Ares, he overcomes them. He vanquishes them and wounds both of them, drives both of them from the field of battle. So this illustration depicts the moment when Ares has encountered Diomedes. They have thrown their spears, and Diomedes strikes Ares with his spear. Before Diomedes encounters Ares, however, he's wounded by a Trojan arrow, and he withdraws to the sidelines to rest and treat his wounds. And the goddess Athena finds him there, and at first she berates him as a slacker. She says, "You're nothing like your father, Tydeus, who was a hero, one of the members of Jason and the Argonauts' crew, and Athena was his champion, just as she is now for Diomedes." And Diomedes responds to the goddess, acknowledges her, and says, "But I'm not slacking, since I'm only following the instructions you gave me to fight only Aphrodite." And hearing this, Athena relents, and in fact she urges Diomedes to fear none of the Olympians, and she joins him in his chariot as his driver. And together they race back into battle, where they've spotted Ares in the midst of the melee, killing Greeks. This illustration depicts the moment when Diomedes, having avoided the spear of Ares with a little help from Athena, throws his own spear. And again, with a little help from Athena, he sees it strike home. He gets a direct hit on Ares, who bellows out his rage and pain at this. And that bellowing of Ares has been described by various poets, sometimes using words like it sounded like the collision of armies or the sound of thousands of men. But either way, Ares bellows out in his rage and pain, and then he leaves the scene of battle and returns to Olympus, where he complains to Zeus, the king of the gods, about the transgressions of both Athena and Diomedes. Diomedes, on the other hand, continues in the battle and continues to wreak havoc on the Trojans. So that's the story behind the illustration. Now let me tell you something about the treatment and the imagery. So first, with the general imagery is dramatic. That's stating the obvious, I guess. The colors are intense. The contrasts between lights and dark are heightened. Everything's a little bit exaggerated. My wife would say that's just an outcome of my general inclination, but I would say that I'm merely treating the subject matter as it fits. And somehow it seems right to me that Diomedes vanquishing Ares should take place in a kind of twilight zone, framed by shadowed Trojan walls and overlooked by glowering mountains and a cloud-piled sky. In terms of imagery, let me start with the main figures. In the upper right is Athena. In her right arm, she supports her shield and her lance, and her left arm is outstretched in a gesture of power. It's how she deflected the spear of Ares from striking Diomedes, and how she guided Diomedes' throw to hit Ares. She's calm and cool, she's imperious. Okay, so below Athena is Diomedes, and this is just in the moments after he's released his spear, and he's in a follow-through motion. Because, by the way, I based this figure on photographs of big league pitchers that I studied. So his right arm is coming down and across his body. His torso is twisting. His right leg is coming up and around as he pivots on his left foot. His eyes are focused. He's staring, following the path of the projectile as he sees it score a direct hit on Ares. He threw a strike. Ares is in the lower left. His right hand grasps the head of the spear. His left hand is outstretched, fingers widespread, as if to ward off the throw from Diomedes or to hold back the ferocious Greek chieftain. He's driven backwards off his feet by the strength of the blow, and his mouth is wide. He's screaming his rage and pain at the temerity of a mortal warrior that would dare to strike him. And his bellows I've depicted as a cloud of skulls that emanate from Ares, and they engulf Diomedes. They swarm around him with their jaws outstretched, screaming, hostile and bellicose, but they don't distract and they don't deter the Greek chieftain. He's focused on his throw. So those are the main figures, but you may have noticed, a few people have remarked to me that there's a lot going on in this illustration, and indeed there is. There are a number of other symbols and things present, so let me talk a little bit about those. First, spirals. I've associated spirals with Diomedes in this and some other illustrations I've done. Again, not because it's a Greek mythology thing, it's just another thing I made up because it seems right. Spirals are found everywhere in nature. They're from a nautilus shell to the shape of a galaxy, and they've been used by a lot of cultures and civilizations to represent a lot of things, from connection to God and the cosmos to direction and focus and intelligence, and all those things seem to go with Diomedes. So that seems fitting. Ares embodies certain traits too, but I guess I'd say more along the lines of discord and terror, and I've represented that with another symbol. You'll notice on his left leg there's a scorpion, and I guess I'll leave it up to you as to whether that scorpion is a live thing that is at home with Ares or a tattoo. But either way, Diomedes and scorpions seem to go together. And you know what they say. you can tell a lot about a person by the company he keeps. So you could say that of either the Scorpion or Aries. You might also notice that Aries is equipped with army boots and a bandolier that has some humongous cartridges in it, and a leg-strapped semi-automatic pistol, and a Prussian military helmet. You might have to look closely in the foreground to ever locate that last item. But you might also say, are these anachronistic? And I guess you could say that, but the idea is that war and conflict has been happening for millennia. Mayhem and slaughter are the rules of war, and nothing ever changes except the weapons. So when I have done illustrations of battle scenes from the Iliad, I've given the combatants whatever weapon comes to mind: knives, machine guns, tanks, whatever I think of at the moment. And that's the idea here. There are a number of other motif symbols within this illustration, but I think I'll leave those to another session. That wraps this one up. If you have questions or remarks, I hope you'll feel free to make them in the comments section down below. And by the way, if you're interested in the specific text that I was reading when I was thinking of this illustration, it's by Alexander Pope, who did one of the greatest translations of the Iliad. And you can find that text along with this illustration on my website. If you're interested, you could go to tomleedy.com. When you find this illustration, if you click on it, it'll give you Alexander Pope's text. It's fantastic. Anyway, so that's it. Thanks for watching and listening, and stay safe.